Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Wednesday, May 25th, and frankly, we are not sure what to talk about after another deadly mass shooting in Texas. At least 19 children and 2 adults are dead after the latest attack on an elementary school. We are live in Uvalde with the latest on the gunman's path to rob elementary school, and we'll consider how lawmakers might respond to this massacre. But frankly, you've made it clear you're not optimistic. We'll focus on your questions and thoughts just ahead. We had been planning to cover Texas politics yesterday. It's one state with a key midterm primary race, along with Alabama and Georgia. We'll dig into last night's results and projections and consider how the shooting in Uvalde might impact upcoming races. Plus, more workers at Starbucks stores are unionizing across the country. You'll find out how the company is responding and how employees say they are being treated. Tonight we begin in Uvalde, Texas. You probably know by now that an 18-year-old gunman killed 19 children and 2 adults at Robb Elementary School. He was inside the school for about an hour using an AR-15 style rifle. Officials say he bought that gun within the last week, just after his 18th birthday. President Biden could visit Uvalde in the coming days, but he reiterated his support for new gun control laws.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done?
Every time a tragedy like this happens, our hearts break. And our broken hearts are nothing compared to the broken hearts of those families. And yet it keeps happening.
In addition to the president and Vice President Harris, we also heard today from Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He spoke about mental health and mass shootings, but he conceded that the shooter had no known mental health history. Now, during this press conference, the governor was interrupted by former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke. He is running as a Democrat to replace Abbott. Here's that confrontation with Uvalde's mayor, Don McLaughlin, in the background. Watch.
Don't play this.
The next shooting is right now, and you are doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick son of a that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue. It's on like you. Why don't you get out of here?
Let's begin in Uvalde, Texas, where NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is standing by. Gabe, I wonder if the mood of the folks you're talking to reflects what we heard from the former congressman. What's going on there tonight? How are folks doing?
Well, certainly a mix of emotions here, Joshua. This anger, as you heard there, but also this somber realization. And this is the first night where this has really started to sink in. We were getting so much new information yesterday with the details of the shooting just trickling out. Now we are starting to hear more and more about the lives lost, those young children massacred inside that classroom. And right behind me right now, a vigil is getting underway here at the Uvalde County Arena. We have seen members of the community streaming in here, and they plan to be here for the next several hours, paying their respects to the 19 children and those 2 adults that were killed, those teachers that were killed inside that school. We heard that press conference, which you just played the video from that confrontation between Beto O'Rourke and Governor Abbott and other Texas officials. We learned more details about the shooting, but certainly emotions running very high as people here in this community and really around the country try to find some, they just try to find some answers for what happened here. And frankly, those answers are few and far between at this point.
Gabe, talk a bit more about how Governor Abbott has been responding to this. A lot's been made in the just over 20, not quite 36 hours even, since this happened, of the fact that not one full year ago, the governor signed some new laws into effect that relaxed some of Texas's restrictions on gun ownership. How has Governor Abbott been responding to this and messaging on this shooting?
Yeah, Joshua, and you said it here. Texas lawmakers just last year loosened gun restrictions. Talking about permitless carry. This, of course, comes after that shooting in El Paso several years ago. Another shooting in Santa Fe, Texas, back in 2018. Here in Texas, and you heard it from Governor Abbott today, his response to the shooting is trying to make the case that this was more about mental health and, perhaps more resources for schools rather than the issue of gun control. It's something we've heard over and over again from Republicans, not just here in Texas, but also from the NRA as well. But Governor Abbott really tried to hit that point despite him being pressed over and over again about these, any potential gun control measures. The shooter here, of course, did buy those weapons legally after he turned 18. Some are questioning whether that should be the case. Local authorities as well as state authorities have said that the gunman had no known previous mental health issues, but when you speak to those that knew him, some of his friends suggested that he was a very troubled young man that was a loner and that perhaps may have shown some signs of this. But again, authorities say that he had no criminal history and no known mental health history that would have tipped them off to all this. Joshua.
Yeah, we should also note that the NRA did release a statement referring to this as the act of a lone deranged criminal. But again, we don't have any hard evidence in terms of his actual state of mind. Obviously, someone who is quite in their right state of mind would not do such a thing. But we have nothing concrete to pin the causality from his mental state to this incident, at least not yet. Thank you, Gabe. That's NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, starting us off tonight from Uvalde, Texas. So, where do things stand in the fight over rights and restrictions when it comes to guns? We'll talk about Congress in a moment, but first, NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson has more on what some states are doing.
To lose a child is like having a piece of your soul ripped away.
It's literally sickening. Sickening.
And it's not right. It's not right.
Across the board, fury over the horrific mass shooting in Uvalde. But the effort to do something about it has divided our country for decades. The Second Amendment was ratified in 1791, establishing the right of the people to keep and bear arms. That puts limits on what regulations the government can put in place. And right now, there's a patchwork of different gun laws and policies across the U.S. The gun reform advocacy group, the Giffords Law Center, has researched and graded state gun laws since 2010. They give states like California, New Jersey, Hawaii, and New York an A grade for what they call common sense gun laws that prevent gun violence. 24 states get an F, including Texas, which just last year expanded gun rights in a big way.
Government is coming to take your guns. Texas will not let that happen.
This past June, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed 7 laws strengthening gun rights, including one making it legal to carry handguns without licenses. In Washington, D.C., 2 bills are sitting at Capitol Hill, both related to background checks. H.R. 1446, which would close what's known as the Charleston loophole that lets some licensed gun sales go through before a required background check is done. Another, H.R. 8, would expand background checks for all firearm sales or transfers in the country. It's not clear if either of those bills would have stopped Tuesday's mass murder in Texas. It's not just the Capitol. Focus is intensifying on the Supreme Court, too, because one of the nation's most restrictive gun laws could be struck down this summer by the justices after 2 men from New York challenged that state's 108-year-old gun law, which requires people who want to carry a concealed handgun show proper cause, arguing it violates their rights to keep and bear arms.
That was NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson reporting. Now, as for Congress, most of what I've heard from viewers is very deep pessimism. Some folks wondered what it would take to provoke federal action. Before yesterday's mass murder was the racist attack on black people in Buffalo, New York. The Gun Violence Archive collects data on these shootings, and it says there have been at least 213 mass shootings in this country this year. 145 days into the year, 213 shootings and counting. And these attacks are increasing. The FBI says active shooter incidents last year were up 52% from the year before. U.S. senators are reacting to this latest shooting. This is new video, but the comments are very familiar.
If people want to talk about banning specific guns, they should propose that, but it wouldn't prevent these shootings.
We have background checks. What we ought to do is enforce what laws we have in the books.
For Americans that are...
Have you looked at how we don't enforce what current laws are in the books?
If you buy a gun, you have to have a background check. That's reasonable. And on the other hand, if you have someone that has mental illness, but you don't really know that and are getting no help whatsoever, if you have someone that you've noticed in your family or even in your neighborhood that has changed their behavior completely, that red flag law, we know those things work, and we can prevent this from happening. That's what we should be doing.
But we have an obligation to act, to put our colleagues on record, because gun violence prevention will be on the ballot this November.
Let's continue now with NBC Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa. And Ali, there is some legislation that the House has sent to the Senate for approval. What bills are we talking about, and what's the good money on whether or not those bills stand a chance of becoming law?
Yeah, Joshua, and the House actually passed these two bills over a year ago. Hallie's package laid it out perfectly there. One of them is aimed at expanding background checks for gun sales to private purchases. The other one is aimed at closing the so-called Charleston loophole that allows guns to be sold before background checks are approved. And that's exactly what we saw happen in 2015 at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston. These two bills never got to the Senate floor because they didn't have the votes to actually pass. That is until we thought last night when Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer took the action to start the first step of getting these votes to the floor for a vote. It's not an official scheduled vote, but it is the first step that these bills would have to take to get a certain vote scheduled on the floor. This morning on the Senate floor, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said the opposite, that these bills would not be taken up anytime soon, saying Democrats and Republicans need more time to talk this over, to negotiate. Listen to part of what he had to say on the Senate floor earlier today.
I believe that accountability votes are important. But sadly, this isn't a case of the American people not knowing where their senators stand. They know. They know because my Republican colleagues are perfectly clear on this issue, crystal clear. Americans can cast their vote in November for senators or members of Congress that reflect how he or she stands with guns, with this issue at the top of the voters' lists. In the meantime, my Republican colleagues can work with us now.
And we know the majority of Americans are in favor of common sense gun reform. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying that he, as you heard him say there, he knows that senators need to take accountability and really stand their ground on where they stand on gun control. This is similar to what we saw 2 weeks ago, where Leader Schumer and Democrats held that vote to codify Roe, that vote that we know was doomed from the start. This is what we expected this vote to be until he said that it wouldn't happen, at least before Memorial Day. We expect senators to leave for a 10-day Memorial Day recess tomorrow. And some Democratic senators, like Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who is really leading this effort in the Senate, is in favor of that delay. He says that senators need time to mull this over, to really understand how consequential their vote is. And so he doesn't have a problem with delaying this vote. He says it's actually needed, Joshua.
Thank you, Ali. That's NBC Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa continuing our coverage tonight. Hey, look, do yourself a favor. If you've been watching coverage of this all day long, when our show is over, maybe give yourself a break. This is a lot for anyone to deal with, including for those of us who report it. And if this is weighing on you, it's okay to reach out for help. The National Alliance on Mental Illness has a helpline. Here is the number, 800-950-NAMI. That's 800-950-6264. You can also go to nami.org/help. You can also try the hotline of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. That's a federal agency. The number is 800-985-5990, 800-985-5990, or you can text Talk With Us, all one word, Talk With Us, to 66746. You know, a mass shooting at an elementary school used to leave us speechless. Now it seems we know how to say what's on our minds. We've had a lot of practice. Susan emailed her reaction to this latest shooting. Susan writes, "My first thought was, dear God, not again. And then I broke down in tears. Tears for those lost and wounded. Tears for their loved ones. Tears for the first responders and community. And tears for the children who witnessed the carnage." Another viewer tweeted, "I just feel disgust. 10 years after Sandy Hook, and it seems we've learned nothing, done nothing. And so many of the people who do support change don't get heard because our electoral and representative system is so unrepresentative of the actual will of the public." And Kim tweeted, "Children in high school when Columbine happened have children of their own now. What does the second generation of gun violence look like?" Kim, that's a good question. Let's get into that and more of your comments with Dave Cullen. He's the author of Parkland, Birth of a Movement. He's also written extensively on the shooting at Columbine High School in Colorado. And there you saw Cedric Alexander. He's the chief of police in DeKalb County, Georgia. That's the Atlanta area. He's also an NBC News law enforcement analyst. Good to have both of you with us. And Dave, I wonder if I could just start with you and Kim's comment, the second generation of gun violence. What would you say to Kim?
It's horrible and it's ridiculous. Columbine seemed like the unthinkable, and now it's not even on the top 10 list of horrible shootings. And, I think nobody said it better than David Hogg after Parkland, that we're adults, they're children, they were looking for us to do something, and we've failed them. We've just done nothing, and it's kind of despicable.
Let me get to some of the comments about the politics at play. Jane tweeted that politicians are in their corners. American people are numb. We need a wake-up call. Susan tweeted, the psychology of people who value power and money over children's lives. Decent people can't understand that. And one viewer tweeted, Republicans are too afraid of their voters to take a stand for sensible gun laws. Now, one senator, Kevin Cramer from North Dakota, was asked about that very thing today. And here's part of what the senator said. Watch.
Do you think Republican voters in your state would react if you supported gun control?
Most would be, they would probably throw me out of office. No, you have to remember, I didn't have the support of the NRA when I first got this job, so.
Chief Alexander, I don't want to drag you too much into politics because I know that you are a public official, but I wonder what your sense is of how the politics of this have affected the work of law enforcement to prevent and respond to mass shootings like this.
Well, being a former law enforcement official is what I am actually. But to answer your question, a lot of the comments that we've just heard and a lot of the things that we hear from people, particularly in this very moment, people are very hurt and people are very angry because when they hear their politicians who are not, in their opinion, in Washington are sitting in Congress, working to their best interests. We know we have statistics to show that there are people out there who want good gun safety. And I'm going to take the control out of it because I think when I say, or anyone say gun control, there's this sense that someone is trying to take something away from me. But if we think about gun safety, good gun safety, what does that mean? How do we keep a public safe and at the same time exercise our Second Amendment rights for those who are solid citizens, who do the things that they're supposed to be doing? This is a complicated issue. We got to find a way to take the politics out of it because at this point, this is about lives. And those young lives that were lost yesterday, and 11 days ago in Buffalo, and those that came before that. This is a sad, sad story in this nation. We got to do better. There's politics on both sides of the aisle here. And I think the American people who are sending people to Congress, are sending them to the state houses across this country, they have to stand up and really have a real loud voice about something being done because the rhetoric and the talk, it's over, time over. I mean, it's over for that. And hopefully we can begin to get it right this time around.
Yeah, Chief, there's a very different kind of conversation going on right now in Uvalde, where you can see on the left side of your screen a vigil taking place for the victims of the shooting at Robb Elementary School. That's a shot of the Uvalde County Fairplex, where a vigil is taking place tonight, one of many community efforts that's taken place, some of which started within hours of the shooting and hours of word beginning to break of what had happened and who had committed that act. With regard to the politics and policy, Dave Cullen, as we continue to watch these live images, I wonder if you, Dave, could get to a comment from Ray, who tweeted, "With guns in the USA, the horse has already left the barn. Besides, there are no laws that will keep criminals from having and using guns." Dave, I remember when Columbine happened, the conversation about guns was very, very different. It was more cultural about, like, the kids these days and what's going on and listening to Marilyn Manson, and like, it was all that kind of stuff. Now it feels like the conversation has evolved a great deal, but how do you see the trajectory of the way we talk about guns in America as it relates to school shootings?
I think the Parkland kids really focused the conversation because they decided that there were many important things here. Mental health is important. The way the media covers these is important, but first and foremost is guns. And that after 20 years of, different sides playing these conversations off on each other, and particularly the NRA and that side, changing the subject to all these things, they said, no, one subject, we're going to talk about guns because that's the most important thing. And I think that needed to happen. And now that's my focus. I think that's the focus of most of the people who want to prevent these, is that's number one. Let's deal with that and keep the subject on that. And I'm so grateful that your other guest, forgive me, I forgot your name, talked about the change of talking about this as gun safety and not control. I think the biggest mistake that people who want gun safety ever did was naming their movement in the 60s gun control. Because, like you said, who the hell wants to be controlled? And how do you think the other people are hearing that when you talk about controlling them? Those are fighting words, and it's led to 50 years of fighting and dramatic losses. I just looked up the statistics today because I'm working on a piece on this. In 1959, the Gallup poll asked whether you're in favor of outlawing all handguns, except by law enforcement. 60% said yes. I think it was 39. Nearly 2 to 1 wanted all handguns gone. That's inconceivable to even bring up the question today. That's how much the side that has been winning all along has lost every battle for 50 years by completely misframing it. And one more thought on that is, like, if only there were a gun safety organization by gun owners. Well, guess what? There was an organization started for gun safety in New York State in the wake of the Civil War. They named themselves the National Riflemen's Association. That was their focus, their primary focus, their reason for being for the first 150 years. And what that tells you is that there is still the core value of people that own guns. We can find common ground on that because they actually believe in that. That's not just something that they're willing to accept. They actually care about it. We need to meet there on safety because that's the one place that people actually agree from both sides.
Since you brought that up, Chief Alexander, the National Rifle Association did put out a statement on the Uvalde shooting. I don't know if we have it handy, but the statement offers deepest sympathies for the families, salutes the courage of the first responders, and it also reads in part, quote, "Although an investigation is underway and facts are still emerging, we recognize this was the act of a lone, deranged criminal. As we gather in Houston," their annual convention is this weekend in Houston, "as we gather in Houston, we will reflect on these events, pray for the victims, recognize our patriotic members, and pledge to redouble our commitment to making our schools secure," unquote. Again, that is a statement from the NRA about the shooting in Uvalde. Bill emailed, "Mass shootings are a natural and foreseeable consequence of the current interpretation of the Second Amendment. Because the unrestricted right to keep and bear arms is paramount, mass shootings are simply a cost of doing business." Chief Alexander, what, if anything, gives you hope that there is a path forward out of this. I don't want to have
Let me tell
to
you what gives.
sit with our team on the show and think of a new way to talk about the same old problem. We racked our brains today to figure out another way to talk about the same thing we just talked about with Buffalo. What gives you hope that there's a path forward?
Well, acknowledging the fact, first of all, there's so many guns on the street in this country at this very moment. The accessibility and the availability of them is quite easy. And I think we all recognize that. That's how far gone we have gotten in this whole thing. You don't have to go to a gun store. You can go anywhere USA and find weapons of your choice that you can purchase on the street or steal, because a large percentage of the guns that are used in violence in the country are stolen, quite frankly. But here's what's the hopeful piece for me. The hopeful piece are the young men and women like Fogg, that kid who was there at Stoneman Douglas, and others that we saw stand up at 16, 17 years of age and conducted themselves with a great deal of poise and intelligence and brilliance. These young people now are our college students across America. They have a whole different feel and idea around guns. The hope for change around gun safety is going to come from that generation. It ain't going to come from my generation. It's not going to come from yours. It's probably going to come from these young kids who are emerging and growing up and who have experienced, even if they did not experience a school's shooting in their respective communities, they being young people, elementary, middle school, high school, college, they were affected emotionally. And people will always remember and sustain what they feel greater than what they are thinking. And they felt it. And they felt it on so many different levels. The hope is in those young people who respect the Second Amendment, but who understand something very different has to change. That's the future of this country. That's where the answers, I believe, are going to lie, in this very complex web of guns in this nation. I look towards them because they're the ones, I think, at some point, who's going to get us out of this.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Today's young people are really quite remarkable. And I do wonder if part of this is generational, where 25, 30 years from now, the people who are in charge at that time will look back on what's happening now and shake their heads. Dave Cullen, author of Parkland, Birth of a Movement, and NBC News law enforcement analyst, Chief Cedric Alexander. Gentlemen, we appreciate you both being here. Thank you both very much. Now, these shootings may not stop anytime soon, but there's a very simple way many of us can help the victims of the next attack, something they're doing now in Uvalde, Texas. You can give blood. Many blood banks across the country have been running dangerously low for some time. University Health System in the San Antonio area is encouraging people to donate. Yesterday, it tweeted a call for donors to help meet the immediate needs of the shooting victims. You'll find more information about donating blood wherever you are from the Red Cross online at redcrossblood.org. And look, I understand if you're afraid of needles. Personally, I'm much more afraid of bullets. I would gladly endure one to save someone's life from the other. redcrossblood.org. We will get to some of today's other stories in just a moment, including a live update from Kyiv on the war in Ukraine, a new executive order on police reform 2 years after the murder of George Floyd, and an update on the U.S. government getting baby formula back in stores. Tonight's headlines begin in eastern Ukraine. Russian forces are pushing ahead, intensifying their attacks on key cities. They're also surrounding smaller pockets of Ukrainian fighters in Donetsk and Luhansk. That's the Donbas region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is describing the situation in Donbas as extremely difficult. Meanwhile, Russia is still blockading Ukraine's ports. Millions of tons of wheat remain trapped in Ukrainian silos. World leaders are intensifying their warnings of a global food crisis. The British Defense Ministry says this will further increase the price of many food products, and the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is accusing Russia of, quote, using hunger and grain to wield power, unquote. NBC's Cal Perry joins us now from Kyiv. And Cal, let's start with the situation in eastern Ukraine. Tell us more about the areas that are being targeted and how that fighting is going.
So it is the Donbass region, as you said, in the eastern part of the country. And one of the concerns here is this is where we're starting to see now consistent casualties amongst Ukrainian forces. It was yesterday when the Ukrainian president said up to 50 to 100 Ukrainian soldiers could be dying there every day. And what we have been seeing is what the international community had warned about and was worried about, which is sort of a stagnation of this conflict, sort of these entrenched positions where you have exchanges of heavy artillery fire. And that seems to be what is happening in the eastern part of the country. You have almost this kind of trench warfare where the Russians now have dug in and have reinforced their ranks with both personnel and with weaponry. And so they are starting to make these slow gains. It is not dramatic like we saw at the beginning of this war. We've had that sort of massive Russian pullback since the beginning of this war. But these slow gains have officials here concerned because, of course, folks here are trying to keep the international community's attention on it. And the war in the East has been raging for 8 years. So it is of concern here amongst officials that Russia could slowly take this territory and then start, as it has in the past, moving towards annexation, Joshua.
A few more quick questions. With regards to the Ukrainian ports, where do the efforts stand in terms of getting those reopened?
So you've had the Russians recently saying that they would be open to opening the ports if sanctions were lifted or if at least sanctions were readdressed. And that, of course, has prompted an outcry, not just from Ukrainian officials, but from officials around the world who accuse Russia of holding the world basically hostage and using, again, hunger as a weapon. We should say there are 20 million tons of grains currently in storage here in Ukraine, not going anywhere. And officials here are starting to become concerned about the harvest, which will take place at the end of the summer into the fall, and that may seem a ways off, but if we don't get that grain, and I say we as in humanity, if humanity doesn't get this grain moving out of Ukraine onto ships and headed to the countries where it's needed, the harvest is not going to make any difference really at all because, of course, there's going to be nowhere to put that grain, and then you're going to have food storages start to go bad. So the clock is ticking on this. The World Food Program is warning of famine around the world, of a hunger crisis. And Russia is clearly using this as leverage to try, at least, and get the sanctions sort of reassessed.
Before I let you go, there are a number of Ukrainians who are reacting to the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. A reporter for Politico, who's covering the war on the ground, said that when he woke up today, the first two people he saw asked him about the shooting. Even President Zelensky tweeted that he was deeply saddened by the news out of Texas. I'm surprised, kind of, that it had that kind of impact on the other side of the world. But on the other hand, these shootings happen so often in the U.S. and the world has talked so much about them, perhaps it's not surprising.
It feels, too, at least being here, like Ukraine and the United States have just become a lot closer, that the world, at least between these two countries, has become closer, and that distance has really gone away because, of course, these two countries are communicating now on a daily basis about aid, about military equipment. We've had these high-profile visits, and you've had a real attempt, I think, on behalf of the Ukrainian government to try to sort of stoke that kinsmanship. And we saw today from the foreign minister as well, saying that Ukraine can understand uniquely the American pain of having these children lost because Ukraine has lost so many children. So a great deal of outpouring of support and condolences. And I should say it has sort of become part of the news cycle here. People here are sort of monitoring the story out of Texas. Again, I think because you have this now deep connection between the two countries, Joshua.
Perhaps something to keep in mind the next time someone describes what's happening at American schools as like a war zone. Thank you, Cal. That's NBC's Cal Perry with the latest from Kyiv. A second shipment of infant formula is in the U.S. from abroad. Today it arrived at Washington's Dulles International Airport. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden and U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy were both there.
Behind me right now are 120,000 pounds, 60 tons, of infant formula flown over from Europe thanks to President Biden's Operation Fly formula. Together with the first Operation Fly formula, the flight that landed in Indiana over the weekend, we have now brought the equivalent of 1.5 million 8-ounce bottles of infant formula to the United States. Even more is on schedule to arrive in the coming days.
FedEx will take this shipment to a Nestle facility in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, FDA Chief Robert Califf testified before the House today. He blamed delays in solving this crisis on COVID, on scheduling conflicts, even on mail that went missing. He also called conditions at the Abbott manufacturing plant in Michigan egregiously unsanitary. This all started partly because of contaminations at that plant. Today marks 2 years since a Minneapolis police officer was caught on camera murdering George Floyd. And today, President Biden signed an executive order to help change federal law enforcement practices. The order calls for a national registry of officers who are fired for misconduct. It bans chokeholds and restraints unless deadly force is authorized, limits the use of no-knock warrants, and restricts the transfer of military equipment to agencies. But to be clear, this only applies to federal law enforcement agencies, not cities, not states. But the president says it's necessary to move forward.
It's a measure of what we can do together to heal the very soul of this nation, to address profound fear and trauma, exhaustion that particularly Black Americans have experienced for generations, and to channel that private pain and public outrage into a rare mark of progress for years to come.
The Biden administration is calling on state attorneys general to give federal grants to any agencies that will adopt these kinds of reforms. You know, Texas would have been in the news yesterday regardless of the school shooting because it was an election day there. We'll break down the results of some key races when we come back. The Pennsylvania Senate primary is still up in the air, and now the Republican race is going to a recount. Pennsylvania's acting Secretary of State says Dr. Mehmet Oz and Dave McCormick are separated by less than 1,000 votes. While voters there await that result, a lot of other races were also called in other states last night. Let's get into those with Jonathan Allen, our senior national politics reporter for NBC News Digital. Jonathan, first of all, let's start in Georgia and what was very much a storyline, at least in part, of Donald Trump's continuing influence over Georgia politics. That did not go the way that the former president wanted.
Absolutely not. The exact opposite of what he wanted. He was very angry at Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and Attorney General Chris Carr for refusing to try to overturn Georgia's election results when he lost in 2020. Remember, he's telling this big lie for the last year and a half that he had won. And so what he did is he got behind their challengers. In one case, David Perdue, the former senator, he recruited him to run against Brian Kemp. And you can see it there on your screen, 73.7% for Brian Kemp, 21.8% for David Perdue, up and down the ballot. Most of Donald Trump's endorsed candidates in Georgia lost and lost to people who had really stood up to Trump back in November of 2020 and afterwards. So a real defeat for him across the board, including not just those three races I mentioned, but also for insurance commissioner in Georgia, which is not usually the kind of race that a former president or a sitting president would get involved in.
This was also an interesting Senate race on the Republican side. You had Herschel Walker, former Heisman Trophy winner Herschel Walker, who basically kind of gave a big middle finger to the whole process and kind of was like, debate schmabates, I'm not showing up for anything. There were literally debates where they just had an empty podium in his place, but NBC News is projecting that he will walk away with the Republican nomination for Senate in Georgia. What does that tell us?
I mean, we're old enough to remember the lingo. Maybe it's not the middle finger, but perhaps he gave the Heisman to those debates with the outstretched arm and the flat palm, distancing himself. Look,
just stiff-armed him, yeah.
What happened to Herschel Walker, and with Herschel Walker winning, which was a big W for Donald Trump, the big difference in that race is that both the Trump Make America Great Again base and the establishment got behind Herschel Walker. There's really no room for anybody else to run. He's obviously well known across the state as a University of Georgia star football player. And so, Walker will advance to this general election against Senator Raphael Warnock, and it's going to be a barn burner. I talked to former Congressman Lynn Westmoreland, a Republican, who said that he was very worried that Herschel Walker hadn't really been vetted yet because the candidates running against him in the primary didn't have the money to go after him. They really had to spend their money introducing themselves. And he's concerned that now Democrats, Warnock, and certainly outside groups are going to come and hammer away at Herschel Walker.
Before we walk away from Georgia, what is the good money on whether or not Herschel Walker, for lack of a better way to put it, knows what he's doing and is qualified to legislate?
That's a great question. And I guess I would revert to my basic understanding of Congress, which is that there are no qualifications besides, the age and the residency and citizenship, right? And so there are a lot of members of Congress that you might look at and say, I'm not sure they're qualified to legislate. It's really a question of whether the voters want to be represented by them, in this case, in the United States Senate. Walker has not, I don't think he's set any records for, great oratory, obviously, as you pointed out, skipping debates. I think there's a lot for him to explain to voters as to why they should choose him to represent them, but he will have several months to try to do it.
And indeed, that will be up to voters. Worth noting, his opponent on the Democratic side, the Reverend Raphael Warnock, is also a political neophyte. He was the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, which was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s church. So there are neophytes and there are neophytes.
Are you saying that's not a political job? That's a pretty political job.
We'll have that conversation another day. We'll have that conversation. As a matter of fact, we have a piece on Monday about the relationship between black preachers and politics, so tune back in for that. But I did want to ask you about another race, particularly because we mentioned there was a race in Texas that was pretty significant with Congressman Henry Cuellar running against a progressive challenger, Jessica Cisneros, for a district that stretches from just southeast of San Antonio down to the U.S.-Mexico border, and that was being very closely watched by Democrats. Where does that stand? Super, super close right now.
I mean, this runoff is as close as it gets. About 177 votes separating the incumbent Cuellar, who currently has the lead, against the challenger, the progressive Cisneros. We're going to have to wait to see, I think, the final counts here. Cuellar is expressing confidence that he has already won. But any election that's close, you kind of take a breath for a little while and make sure all the votes have been counted.
Yeah, and I'm just checking, if you'll bear with me just 1 second. I want to make sure that we have not called that. No, we have not called that race. Those are still considered too close to call at this point. Thank you, Jonathan. That's NBC's Jonathan Allen catching us up on yesterday's primaries.
Take care.
Some Starbucks workers are forming unions to secure better working conditions. But now, some of them claim the company is retaliating against them. We'll get into that before we go. America's labor movement is having a moment right now, from strikes at major companies like Kellogg's and John Deere to unionization drives at Amazon, REI, Trader Joe's, Apple stores, and Starbucks. Today in Chicago, the group Starbucks Workers United is claiming victory in 2 successful vote counts. But some baristas who recently unionized say the company is retaliating. NBC's Maura Barrett has the story.
When baristas at Buffalo, New York's Elmwood location successfully unionized the first corporate-owned Starbucks last December, their victory sparked an onslaught of organizing in Starbucks stores across the country. Starbucks workers filing petitions to unionize at over 260 stores and counting, representing more than 7,000 employees, 84 stores already voting yes. But organizers here in Buffalo say they're now facing corporate retaliation and harassment. Similar claims are popping up across the country.
There's itty-bitty changes just being made just to frustrate us. Like, they just changed our tip boxes. They're like half the size, so we get less tips now. We get yelled at for just stupid stuff that didn't matter before.
A complaint filed against Starbucks by the National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB, an independent federal agency responsible for enforcing workers' rights and labor law, accuses Starbucks of applying rules, quote, more strictly against employees who formed, joined, or assisted the union.
I would wear a suicide awareness pin that said, "Have hope, it's okay not to be okay." And they kept trying to make me take that off.
The NLRB complaint also contends Starbucks randomized Angel Krempa's shifts.
I used to be an opener. Then they moved me to close. And then I was working every single shift during the week. I would work an open, a close, a mid, a open, a close, just to force my mental health to plummet.
A Starbucks spokesperson saying Krempa had a history of not following Starbucks policies. adding, a partner's interest in a union does not exempt them from the standards we have always held. We will continue enforcing our policies consistently for all partners.
You were part of the team here in Buffalo that was one of the first Starbucks to unionize 6 months ago. Do you think Starbucks corporate respects the unions now?
I do not think Starbucks corporate respects the unions.
Why?
Because if they did, they wouldn't still be actively trying to stop this movement.
Reinstate Layla! 19-year-old Layla Dalton says organizing cost her job at a Phoenix area store, the NLRB issuing a complaint on her behalf as well. The complaint alleging she received write-ups for previously tolerated incidents after she began organizing.
I was told, hey, Layla, I need to talk to you in the back. And I got a write-up with 10 bullet points that went back to 6 months.
Dalton says her managers were tallying routine infractions long after they occurred, trying to pressure her to quit. She says it almost worked.
I don't deserve this. I will get a lawyer to fight me.
Sharing this emotional video of that moment when her manager pulled her aside.
I think I want to put in my 2 weeks.
And I can give you a piece of paper.
I'm tired of being treated this way.
Is that the decision you want to make?
I just want to call my mom right now.
Starbucks eventually fired Dalton, telling NBC News it was because she left her phone in her manager's workspace and recorded conversations she was not a part of, which the company says violates both its policies and federal law. Dalton says Starbucks is twisting the truth.
They realized they can keep harassing me. They can make my life miserable at work, but I'm not quitting. I'm not. So I got fired.
Allegations of anti-union tactics now extending into the company's elite reserve roastery stores, too.
We're expected to be experts and masters in our craft, and some of us are like, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay rent this month. I don't know if I'm going to be able to eat today.
Organizer Liz Duran says employees at the Seattle Reserve Roastery were forced to sit through anti-union meetings.
We had captive audience meetings, 2 times a week.
A Starbucks spokesperson saying in part, our meetings are not mandatory and are designed to make sure our partners have all the facts.
It was meetings of, 10 to 15 partners with management, our district manager, store manager, trying to tell us about the union when in reality was, sometimes they opened the meeting with, I want you to vote no.
Was it that direct to vote no?
There was a couple times, and we filed unfair labor practice complaints with the NLRB over those tactics.
Here at Starbucks headquarters, the company is facing one of the largest unionization efforts in recent memory. The result could determine the future for the iconic brand.
I think our preference is that the company and our partners are a part of the transformation, the forward movement that we need to make the best Starbucks possible. Obviously, people who want to organize, they have a right to organize, and we will respect that right to organize.
Some of the partners we've spoken to have expressed that they faced some retaliation after expressing interest in unions or have experienced captive audience meetings, sometimes things that are seen as union-busting techniques. What's your response to that, and does Starbucks recognize that those activities are illegal?
In no way, shape, form, or fashion have we done any of those things. And in fact, as a company, we've held ourselves to the highest of bar to make sure that if people who want to unionize, they're respected, they're honored, and they are appreciated in terms of their right to organize. And so any activities or what have you, we have not been a part of any of that.
So what do you say to workers that feel that they have been treated that way?
I would say to them that that's not Starbucks, that's not what we do.
The company's famed CEO, Howard Schultz, returning in April.
Our values are not and never have been the result of demands or interference from any outside entity.
Conducting collaboration sessions with partners and working to convince them a union is not necessary.
And the union contract will not even come close to what Starbucks offers.
Schultz instituting a wage boost to new benefits, improved sick leave policies, and implementation of credit card tipping in stores. This coming as the NLRB issues over 50 complaints against Starbucks around the country, alleging a laundry list of National Labor Relations Act violations and asking courts to reinstate workers like Dalton it says were fired after engaging in union activity.
Starbucks has really deployed a very, very typical anti-union playbook. They've used strategies that have become almost cliched, referring to the union as an outside third party, trying to instill fear in their workers, trying everything they can think of to persuade workers to vote against unionizing. And so far, their strategy isn't really paying off.
More stores voting to unionize every week.
It's just been amazing to see this movement grow and to be a part of it.
We have a seat at this table, and we do get to have a say in what we get from the work that we do.
Organizers say with the union backing them up, they're not backing down.
Maura Barrett joins us now with more and more. I'm not sure who to believe on this. It sounds like each side has a lot of very strong claims, either supporting these claims of union busting. Starbucks has been very solidly saying none of that has happened. What do we come away with at the end of the day? It sounds like a little bit of he said, she said, except for that recording from Arizona that you shared with us.
100%. It's been a process, Joshua, for these union organizers. Like you said, a lot of he said, she said, they said, and it gets very tricky when these union organizers are trying to get the word out and then also are seeing pushback, they say, from Starbucks. They say every time they see a victory, they're nervous about underhanded tactics that they might face from Starbucks pushing back. And so this is just something that's really concerning because they say that they're worried that they could get fired or lose some income because of the change in schedules. And so it's something where these union organizers, those that are interested in this, are putting a lot on the line to do so, but we're seeing that trickle down effect at other Starbucks stores and other companies across the country, Joshua.
I do want to underscore, though, Maura, it sounds like from the workers that you spoke to, they said that they are convinced that their efforts will still prevail, that this won't derail their organizing.
100%. They're very committed to this effort. And they said to me, they said, you know, as we see other companies do the same thing, we expect other tech companies like Amazon, like other companies like REI to push back the same way we're seeing Starbucks. But we're hoping that the fact that we are working hard to prevent this and to push back against it, that other organizers are as well, saying that this is largely a Gen Z younger organizing movement. They have a lot of people backing them up on social media. And that's how a lot of this word has been spread and how people have stayed so committed to the cause.
And before I let you go, did you hear anything from Starbucks workers who are not part of the unionization effort, who maybe feel that this is kind of peripherally affecting their jobs in ways that they may or may not support?
100%. And that's the thing, right? For every chunk of people that are interested, there is a chunk of people that are happy with the status quo. Starbucks even telling us that there is a significant percentage of their workers who like how things are right now, but they feel intimidated by the union organizing that they've seen. A lot of people saying that they're cool with how Starbucks is. They're lucky to be working there right now. But then on the flip side, you have people like Liz Duran, that barista at the Reserve Roastery in Seattle that we spoke to, who said when she joined years ago, she was attracted to Starbucks because of its progressive policies. It was ahead of the curve. But because Starbucks was so progressive at the time, they set the standards for how a lot of companies act right now. And so those that are interested in unionizing are saying that it's time for Starbucks to up its game when it comes to workers' benefits.
Thank you, Maura. That's NBC's Maura Barrett reporting for us tonight. And hey, thank you for making time for us. Do stay in touch with us. We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. You can always leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.